Hi there, my name is Jessica Parsons, and I'm going to be talking with you today about how intelligence is tied to language acquisition and how it relates to the deaf community. Let's start by looking at the negative stereotypes that we often hear, but maybe don't recognize the harm of in the moment. I'm going to play you a clip from the 2020 film The Prom, based off of the Broadway musical of the same name.
I read three-quarters of a news story and knew I had to come. And unless I am doing the miracle worker, I won't play blind deaf.
We've all heard the phrase deaf and dumb. It's used throughout popular media and meant to play on the stereotype that because deaf individuals cannot speak, they must lack intelligence or wouldn't be able to reason as well as we hearing individuals can. In the example, one of the main characters uses the phrase to imply that because she is not blind, deaf, or dumb, she will not accept the bigotry of the community. That somehow the members of the community must be one of the three categories, or all three, in order to accept such blatant discrimination. Ouch. The fact that this movie came out in 2020 illustrates how this hurtful phrase is still very common in our society. But where did this idea come from? Well, let's take a look way back to see how this idea came about. And I'm talking way back. Meet Aristotle, an ancient Greek philosopher who is known for his intelligence. His theories are the basis for most of our modern day philosophy. However, his views on the deaf certainly weren't groundbreaking, or even true. Aristotle believed that deaf people couldn't be educated without hearing. In fact, he's quoted to have said, "It is impossible to reason without the ability to hear. Those who are born deaf all become senseless and incapable of reason." And let's give the man credit, he was on the verge of a major linguistical breakthrough here, but missed the mark entirely. If we dig a little deeper than an ancient philosopher, we can actually find a link between intelligence and language, just not the one he was expecting. So, what did Aristotle believe deaf individuals couldn't learn? Well, he was focused on verbal communication, that is, spoken language. The sounds that we use that, when compiled together using phonemes, morphemes, and other elements, give us distinct words and phrases that carry meaning. While deaf individuals can learn to speak, many use a sign language, like American Sign Language, which is a manual, nonverbal communication system. This system is actually a language. It has its own phonemes and morphemes, just like a spoken language. These complex pieces are formed on the hands, body, and face instead of in the throat, mouth, or nose. Any form of language can communicate intelligence, signed or spoken. So, how did a Greek philosopher get it so wrong? Well, in order to communicate intelligence through a language, one has to have a language with which to communicate. Which brings me to my next point. That is, we have to learn our primary language. So this chart shows data collected by a study of deaf children of deaf parents and hearing children of hearing parents. These children have access to and are exposed to language since birth. We can see that there isn't much of a difference at all in their ability to communicate. Both deaf children of deaf parents and hearing children of hearing parents will manage to keep pace with one another in their own language. This certainly would have surprised Aristotle. When we talk about how we learn language, let's first look at our own hearing perspective. When we were born, we started to observe the world around us. We began to babble and imitate the sounds of other members of our family, and we learned our language through books that are read to us, television programs, conversations that we might have had, and songs. In every situation, there was an abundance of exposure to language, and we absorbed it like a sponge. A deaf child born to deaf parents will experience an almost identical environment. The baby will learn to babble with their hands, imitating the shapes, movement patterns, and facial expressions of their parents. They'll absorb language through other family members, books that are read to them, television programs that feature signing, conversations that they might have, and storytelling. These language-rich environments are the perfect place to acquire language because the parents and their children share the ability to communicate in the same language. Now, we have to consider that over 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. How does this affect communication development and their ability to communicate intelligence? Quite a bit, actually. Deaf children of hearing parents do not share a language. While some parents will learn to sign, the majority do not. This limits the deaf child's access to a rich language environment and the ability to acquire language. While many of these families use lip reading and gesturing methods, as well as other manual communication systems, these are not languages and do not give the child the benefits or development that language provides. They will likely face challenges in developing theory of mind, executive function, and even metacognition abilities. This lack of a primary language is called language deprivation, and it affects an estimated 70% of deaf children. However, the same is not typically true of hearing children born to deaf parents. These children will grow up in a language-rich environment and learn sign language as their primary language, with English as a secondary language. You see, the difference here is access. A hearing child of deaf parents still has full access to their parents' language, as sign language has no barriers for sighted individuals. However, a deaf child cannot access their hearing parents' language. Spoken language is a barrier for those who are deaf or hard of hearing. It's important to note that language deprivation can occur with any child with limited access to language. But remember when we talked about how hearing babies acquire language? How they use the cues of their environment that they can physically access because of their ability to hear? This makes cases of language deprivation in those with the ability to hear much rarer than those who are unable to access spoken language. Language deprivation was likely very common amongst the deaf community during Aristotle's time. With no access to language, the chain reaction of cognitive delays can leave an individual with a severe disadvantage and a lack of an ability to communicate their intelligence. It wasn't until the 18th century when sign language started to become standardized and the languages became more widely available. Aristotle would have had no inkling of a sign system, let alone its ability to form a complex language to rival his own. Before that, deaf individuals and their interactions with hearing people would have consisted of gestures, pointing, and mimicry to communicate very basic messages. So let's look at the effects of growing up without language. Of the 90% of deaf children born to hearing parents, it's estimated only 40% of those children will have parents who learn sign language. Of those 40%, many of these parents will not reach fluency, and the children will be learning alongside their parents. In no way is this meant to put down the efforts of these parents. We're simply addressing the fact that, unlike deaf children of deaf parents and hearing children of hearing parents, deaf children of hearing parents will not have the same access or exposure to native signers that other children will. Their vocabulary will be restricted, and communication will be more difficult. Remember when you first learned a second language in school? Now imagine if you had to teach that language to a younger version of yourself without using your primary language. That is the challenge that's faced by hearing parents of deaf children. Psychologists who have studied language deprivation have found that 3 cognitive functions tend to be affected when we do not acquire a spoken language by the age of 5. Children who face language deprivation often face issues with executive function or the ability to self-regulate their emotions and behaviors. They will act up or not participate with other children in expected ways. They may even lack the ability to interact or learn from or with their peers. This is not because the child is bad or dumb, but because a lack of language has denied them access to the life lessons of those in a language-rich environment. These children also tend to lack a sense of self. Remember all those home movies from your early childhood where your parents would call your name to have you smile at the camera? Or the baby talk of, "You're so strong." Those interactions were all developing your sense of self and identity. The use of your name helped you to assign meaning to it, namely that you're called by a specific name. When your parents called you strong, you began to link the idea of strength, maybe lifting a big block, with yourself or your identity. Because of this link between language and meaning, you developed a sense of self or metacognition. You were also able to start developing a theory of mind, or an idea of what others might be thinking. You might have linked the idea that if you pick up the big block, your parent would believe you were strong and tell you. Or that if you cried, your parent would ask you what was wrong, and you could explain the injustices of your brother taking the block from you. Granted, this is an oversimplified example of how your acquired language can help you develop thoughts and regulate emotions and actions. But now imagine if your vocabulary was limited or non-existent. So let's look at an example. Let's say these are the words you have been exposed to and understand. Just these words on this slide. You've finished playing outside and you come inside and you're hungry, so you want to eat lunch. Your mother asks you what you would like to eat. You know the word for sandwich, so that's a good start. But as she begins making it, you see her using some yellow stuff on your sandwich. You've never had that before. Why would she feed you that? You point to it, but how do you ask what the yellow stuff is? How, using the words that you understand, would your parent explain the concept of mustard to you? Remember when you started learning your second language? You could only communicate basic ideas. Hello, my name is, but if someone asked you how you're doing, your response was limited. I'm doing all right, but my dishwasher flooded the kitchen and I need to deal with it after class. Wouldn't have been something you would communicate. You aren't any more or less intelligent. You simply didn't have the ability to communicate complex thoughts in that language until you learned more of your language. Notice that these examples are not exclusive to deaf individuals. Again, language deprivation has the potential to affect both hearing and deaf individuals. Access to any language would be the key to unlocking this barrier, spoken, signed, or written. Now imagine you could only use the words on this slide to think to yourself, to form your thoughts and identify your place in this world. How do you communicate love or hate when you don't have the words? Imagine if your inner thoughts were just as limited by a lack of language or exposure to the ideas that language brings. Could you understand the concept of sameness, that ketchup and mustard are both things that you put on a sandwich? That the people around you have thoughts that are different than yours? This is language deprivation. The potential for intelligence is still there. It just can't be accessed in a way that can be communicated. Again, the problem is not the language itself. We know there are hundreds of thousands of words in the English language and a similar amount in American Sign Language. It's the ability to learn and access those words that's the true barrier. So was Aristotle right? Is it impossible to reason without the ability to hear? Are those who are born deaf all doomed to become senseless and incapable of reason? The deaf individuals Aristotle would have been exposed to would have lacked any sort of language, severely delaying or denying them access to theory of mind, executive function, and metacognition. But it isn't a lack of hearing that is the barrier to their ability to learn. It's a lack of language that led Aristotle to draw these conclusions. So, to fix an ancient Greek philosopher's theory, it would be correct to state that it is impossible for anyone denied access to language to develop reasoning skills because language in any medium, signed or spoken, is required for advanced thought or reasoning. We are limited in our intelligence only by our ability to create and understand new ideas and to express our own thoughts through language. Being deaf doesn't make for a lack of intelligence. It's a lack of language that robs individuals of an ability to develop and express intelligence. Even hearing children can be deprived of language, although, for the reasons stated earlier in the presentation, we know this would be exceptionally rare. Over the last few years, language deprivation has become a topic of great interest to linguists, psychologists, and researchers alike. The more we learn about this syndrome, the more easily we can help parents. I hope this presentation has helped you to better understand how even a Greek philosopher can miss the idea that intelligence requires language, not hearing. We know that the stereotype of deaf and dumb is not only harmful to the deaf community, but incredibly inaccurate. Our language acquisition is what gives us the ability to grow our intelligence. We need language to form our own sense of self and interact with others. We need language to develop and express ideas and to learn from others. Whether spoken or signed, all languages give us a means to develop intelligence. Thank you.